Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome back to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, we are in the lovely San Francisco HQ once again, recording new episodes of Digital Builder. We're so excited to be here. Today, we're going to talk all about integrations, data management, and a whole lot more. To help me tell that story, I'm here joined by the co-founder of Agave, Tom Reno. Tom, how you feeling today? You feeling good?
Feeling great. Excited to be here. We're a local San Francisco company, so it's easy to get down here and in the beautiful office here. And yeah, excited to chat.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. And for anybody out there who's like, integrations, I'm not excited. You should be excited because this is an incredibly important aspect of how your tech stack works, how your data flow goes. I'm not going to steal the thunder here, especially because I'm not the expert. So Tom, I'd love it if you could just give me a little bit of context about what your company does and why we're here talking about integrations. And then also, can you define integration for our audience? Like, give us a sense of what this means to you and the companies that you talk to every day.
Sure thing. As you said, I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Agave. We do construction-specific data integration. So there's a bunch of data integration problems out in the world. We focus on one industry, which is construction. And what we do is we stitch together systems so they can talk. So that's the short way to say it. So you might have a project management system or scheduling system or an accounting system. And without integrations, those are all silos. You've got data accumulating, you've got people entering data, you've got historical data stored over years, and you create data silos where that data becomes trapped if the systems aren't sharing that data and talking to each other. So what we do as a company is we come in, we understand your systems, we stitch them together using technology that we build so they can share data in an automated, in a reliable, and a safe way, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think anybody who works in the industry these days is very familiar with the data siloing that can happen because, let's be real, we've had it's wild how many tools exist for the AEC industry today, or tools that weren't made for AEC but still are leveraged by these companies on a daily basis. And every moment that you have to manually move data from system to system or manually switch between tools and tasks is wasted opportunity, wasted time. And I think opportunities to introduce all kinds of errors. And it's just a big challenge to manage. And so I'm grateful for organizations like yours to, help manage that flow and get into the weeds. But I think a lot of people might have some misconceptions behind how integrations can function or how they can go about making their tools talk to each other in a more effective way. Can you walk us through some of those biggest misconceptions or maybe myths that you end up facing when talking, about the joys that is integrating data between tools?
Yeah, the first one we often see is there's an assumed definition of what an integration is. That there's some canonical word integration and everyone says it and it means the same exact thing. What you say means what I say. We have the same idea in our mind. The reality is there's a lot of different types of integrations and some are very basic, some are sophisticated, and there's a spectrum, right? So I think clarifying, what do you actually mean by integration? And what do you want the integration to do?
Yeah.
Right? Let's break down what an integration actually is. You've got system A, system B. They have data. You want that to be shared in a bridge, is the analogy I like to use, between the systems on a regular basis. That could be fully automated. It could be a manual file export and import, which some people call that an integration. It could be triggered on a schedule. It could be triggered by a data update. There's so many different factors involved in what an integration actually is that I think companies that we speak with come in with an assumed understanding of what that means. But I think always clarifying up front, when a vendor claims, hey, we have an integration, what does that actually mean? Break that down. So I think understanding what the definition is and clarifying that up front, I think is important because it's a common misconception that what I say is what you understand the integration term to mean. Two would be that integrations are simple, off-the-shelf, plug-and-play tools. And hey, I'm on system A and system B. They're very industry standards. You can just glue them together and it works very quickly and instantaneously almost, right? Yeah. It's a very quick implementation. There's no customization and onboarding should be 10 minutes. Turns out that's very far from the truth, right? Anyone who's done integration can understand, these are very complex systems, even if they're industry standards. And even for a small company, there's a lot of configurations and customizations you might add, whether that's a custom field or a specific workflow. Not all integrations are the same, and they're not plug and play. We like to describe it more as plug and configure.
Mm-hmm.
So we can stitch together your systems. That part is relatively straightforward. However, there's a lot of configuration that we'll need to fine tune to ensure that systems can talk to each other in the way that your company needs it to.
I love that point too. And I think when you were qualifying, what do you want to do with this integration or this data? That's so incredibly important, I think, for folks to remember. And whenever I'm talking about folks going down their data journey and starting to be more effective managers of their data, I think it's really important for them to go, what on earth do I want to achieve? Because if you're just integrating just to integrate, or you're just moving data around just to do it, or capturing data just because, I mean, yes, by all means, keep capturing data. It's better to have it than not. But having the intent of use early as possible, I think makes such an impact on usability and usefulness of that information as well. Because you can have all the data you want in the world, but if it's not captured in a way that actually gives you some insights or some ability to make a decision or automate a process or whatever it might be, you're not going to get very far. It's not going to make anything different for your organization aside from, that base level integration. It's connected. Cool. Now what?
What's the point?
Yeah.
Right. What's the ROI? And one of the hard parts about integration is, and maybe this is another common misconception, which we can circle back to, is integrations don't solve ambiguous business processes. They codify processes that you've already defined.
Yeah.
And often when we're adding an integration for a company, it surfaces misalignment within a company or confusion or undefined processes of, hey, who does cut purchase orders? What system should we add vendors to? Where do we enter time and where does that flow? How do we run payroll when we have that data? Some of these are figured out, but sometimes different teams within the same company might have different answers. And if you try to integrate on top of that, that's going to be very difficult and introduce a world of pain because there are unclear requirements and there's unclear ROI and expected output on the other side of those. So I think having very clear understanding of what you're looking to get by integrating, integration itself is not valuable.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some ROI and some problem you're looking to solve. We can talk through a lot of those. There are many out there, but sometimes we talk to companies and they hear a buzzword, whether that's AI or integration, and they're shopping for that tool with an unclear purpose. And I think part of our discovery process with customers we engage with is, what are you looking to get out of it? And maybe the answer is unclear, in which case, no worries. Go talk to your team.
Yeah.
See if there's a case there. We can chat again, but you don't want to integrate just to integrate, as you said.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there to be really intentional about what you're choosing to do next. And it sounds like it's not an easy process, and I appreciate you getting into that a little bit. Can you talk through some of these challenges a little bit more? Like, what do folks face when they start this journey? And, how can they mitigate some of those challenges so when they do come to talk to you, they're more effective at the onset of the conversation or have a little bit more focus and purpose instead of, chasing a tool for the tool, now you're chasing a purpose for a reason.
Yeah, what we see to be very helpful is teams having discussions internally at their company and understanding what are the systems we want to connect. Because there might be 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prioritize those? And then what are your requirements? What are you looking to get out of this? Who are the teams that are impacted? And who's entering data where today? So we like to recommend having a clear source of truth for each type of data. So you don't have 2 systems that are the sources of truth, which inevitably compete,
mm-hmm.
which then causes confusion, frustration, change management issues. So I think having those discussions internally, even early stage, to surface what are the systems that we're potentially going to connect? Who's impacted by those? Is it your project managers? Is it your project accountants? Is it your operations folks who are, working across projects? And getting those people involved, and then ideally defining some sort of requirements list, right? So put it in a spreadsheet, put it in a bullet format, whatever it is. But if you can come to a vendor or a consultant with a rough set of requirements, that makes the conversation much more productive and I think way less painful.
Yeah.
It's kind of knowing what to expect, understanding who in your organization needs to be involved in those discussions. And then, as we were discussing, having clear ROI calculations in mind.
Yeah.
They don't have to be specific numbers, but are we saving time? Are we reducing manual errors? Are we attempting to adopt modern software to improve recruiting and retention, which is a big, labor shortage issue for a lot of companies? That is super helpful from our side. Another thing is, after having those discussions, ensuring that you are actually on and using and familiar with the systems that you want to integrate, which sounds a little silly, but we do talk with a lot of customers who want to understand the depth and breadth of integrations before they buy a piece of software. It's a prerequisite, and it's often a blocking factor for adopting a project management system, a new accounting system, a new timekeeping system, scheduling system, whatever it is.
It's a fair question to ask early on, where you go, is this going to play nicely in some capacity with everything we're already using, or are we iterating now and this is going to change a little bit? And finding that out before you've signed on the dotted line for a tool that might cost you $1 million a year or whatever that might be. That makes a lot of sense, but that's also, I'm sure, very complex because they don't know how they're using that tool yet because they haven't used that tool yet. That's like an interesting chicken and egg scenario to navigate, especially where you fit in it amongst all of this aspects of the ecosystem.
Exactly. And then customers often come to us and say, well, we're considering options A, B, and C for this new category of software. Which integrates best with our existing systems?
Yeah.
It's a hard question to answer if you don't have objectives to measure what does best mean, right?
One piece of advice that I always give folks when they're talking about starting to standardize the way they capture and manage data and kind of moving down their data journey, for lack of a better descriptor, is focus on where you really want to start first and don't boil the ocean at the beginning of this conversation too, because if you try to change absolutely everything, or you try to find every aspect of your business, now everything's plugged in, that's much harder to move forward in because you don't have so many champions. There's a lot of risk involved in that. And it's a lot of change all at the same time. And so I think picking one area of your business where it makes the most sense to start capturing data with more intent. Say your safety process is already pretty standardized. Is that the one where you get to be more intentional now and make it even better, get everybody excited about what you're doing? Now you can start applying those changes and those ideas to other areas of the business. And great, you've got a proof case now where you get to come back and go, look at how well this went and how it improved the business in this area. We can do this for you over here. And folks are going to be a lot more receptive to it. And you get to build this over time. And so I think it's, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, this is the moment to just really focus in and go, okay, where do we start? And then where do we go from there versus we're going to try to do everything? Because let's be real, in construction, there's not a lot of free time to then learn how to do all of these new things or make all these changes all at once. And so it's kind of pick your poison, I guess.
Totally. And what we recommend is narrowing scope in whatever you do, right? You don't want to attempt to boil the ocean, as you said. And how do you earn trust with your stakeholders who might be burned in bad software implementations in the past or skeptical of the value of whatever software you're attempting to adopt? You start narrow, you develop proof points, you validate that, hey, here's what we said we were going to do. Here's the time frame. We did it in the time frame. Here's the result. It worked for you, right? Cool. Now we can expand scope. So I think starting narrow, starting focused, starting on your what we would call core systems of record versus the shiny new app that maybe just hit the market and doesn't have clear ROI or maybe isn't widely adopted yet. Focus on the core systems, and maybe an analogy to use is, you've probably heard this in terms of like prioritization and time management. You've got this bucket, you've got to fit, boulders, rocks, and sand in it. Get the big rocks in first. That's how you fit everything in that cylinder. And the big systems are typically a project management, an accounting system, maybe a scheduling system. Get those right. It's hard to build a sound structure that can integrate well, can do what your company needs ultimately on top of a shaky foundation.
Yeah, it's kind of like building a building.
Yeah, hey.
Very fitting for our conversation today. So I've got a question for you about just very company-specific workflows. And I think anybody who's worked in construction recognizes that every company doesn't do it exactly the same way. Like there's a lot of commonality in workflows, but some companies might have something very unique or a tool they've developed internally themselves or a myriad of unique circumstances to their own business. Can you talk to me about navigating that, since it's not going to be the same for every company? And I think any software company developing has to think about this very intentionally, because it's not a one size fits all. And so like, how do you get people to either adhere to this, or alternatively, how do you flex to meet their own personal circumstances in building?
Totally. We draw a distinction between customizations, which are true one-offs. Let's say you're a general contractor and 30 years ago, you had a team of crack in-house software developers, and you built an accounting system.
Yep.
No other company in the world uses that accounting system. That's a truly custom, one-off piece of software. That's going to be really hard to integrate, right? Versus customization on one side, configurations on the other. And the way I like to think of that is, it might seem one-off, but can you generalize it? Can you generalize it such that company A, B, and C might do this process slightly differently, but you can create a general feature that you can put on a settings page in a piece of software and toggle it to value A, B, or C, and it can apply to that company.
Yeah.
So we draw the distinction. We don't do any customizations. And in fact, when we're speaking with you as a company who's interested in integrating, we'll outline as we do our discovery customizations that we understand your business to have, present that to you. And if you can come to us, before with that list of customizations, even better. But often companies don't even know, right? Because they're not looking at 10 or 12 other companies to compare themselves. And what we'll do is we'll summarize that and we'll play it back to the company. And often they'll need to go through an exercise over the next few quarters, months, whatever it is, to reduce those customizations to have a more standard setup. Doesn't mean you have to be like every other company, but having those rough edges shaved off allows you to have your systems talk together in a shorter time period, but also more effectively with lower maintenance.
Yeah.
Right. So then on the configuration side, what we'll do is we'll understand, how does this process work? How do you add vendors? Who adds that? When you sync data, let's just roll with the vendors example from your accounting system to your project management system. Do you want all 1,000 vendors to sync over the past 30 years? Or do you want just the 200 that you've talked to in the past 2 years? So that's an example configuration just to make it concrete. Or you may want to filter the data before you push it over to the other system to exclude certain data. And every company will have different choices. Some might be, hey, we only do business with 3 vendors. Everything else you can exclude. Some might have, 400. That's a great case where it might seem custom, but it's actually just a turn of a knob effectively to make that work for your specific company. Maybe if you're someone in the audience listening to this, starting to think about your business processes, maybe talk to some of your peers and say, hey, how do you do these specific workflows? And are these truly custom to our business? And if so, how do we more closely approximate the industry standard so it's easier, faster, and frankly, cheaper to connect the systems and make them talk when you need to?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to take a close look at all of your processes and think, are we doing it this way because this is the best way to do it? Or are we doing it this way because that's just how we've done it for a long time? And that's an uncomfortable conversation sometimes, I think, where folks kind of step back and go, okay, like we have this really unique process. This made sense when our company was doing $25 million in revenue every year 15 years ago. We're now a $400 million general contractor. Does this still make sense alongside everything else that you just shared as far as just focusing and being really deliberate? And so I think even if it feels a little painful, I think there's just still a tremendous opportunity for a real honest look at how you're getting work done, especially so much has changed over the last 10 years with how we deploy technology, the amount of data that we're generating as companies. Like construction companies are almost data management companies now because they are creating so much information, but they're not necessarily using a lot of that data or leveraging it or have the ability to access and find it. And so there's a lot mixed in there. I'm curious, if somebody's out there who's really getting into the weeds now and they go, okay, I'd really like to pursue a more advanced data approach and start integrating my tools. Do you have any other advice that you would offer them other than what we've already kind of dug into at this point?
I would understand your systems and how they can share data. So that sounds abstract, but certain newer systems will have things called APIs, right? And those are standardized interfaces that allow you to pull data out, push data in a very predictable, secure way. They're very well documented and easy to understand for a provider like us to come in, plug in, get your data out.
Yep. And most big software platforms have this, correct?
You would think that.
Yeah.
I would say ones that are built in the past 20 years definitely have that.
Yeah. Okay.
However, APIs are a newer concept, right? If you're building software, maybe 20 years is a rough cutoff. 30 years ago, you weren't thinking of cloud computing or APIs. If you were, you would have built AWS, right? You'd probably be in a different business and much wealthier. So there's a lot of systems that are very widely adopted, have a large install base across construction in North America that don't have APIs.
Okay.
And that might govern what you can and can't do, right? So you have to know the constraints of what your systems can and can't do to understand where can we potentially get benefit. So talk to your software vendor and understand, do you have APIs? If not, how do we expect to get data in and out of the system? And that also, talking about uncomfortable conversations, might be uncomfortable depending on what the vendor has. To your point, a lot of even older systems now are introducing APIs. Those are generally coming onto the market, which then makes your data more accessible so you can emit it and connect it with your other systems. But that's maybe the first step, is understand what can we actually do here? And that kind of defines the option set of what you can take advantage of.
It makes sense. And I think this is also a differentiator for companies because, let's be real, somebody rolling straight out of college might not be super excited about navigating and working with a tool or technology that might have been built and implemented and might not have changed much since before they were born. Let's be real.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of old tools hanging around still, and for good reason. It's not like things exist all the time that can instantaneously replace this. This is a challenging process, and I don't want to be flippant about that. But if you're trying to get top talent and folks that are excited about using technology and working in construction, you have to give them tools that they're happy to use, or they're going to go work for the company that uses the ones that they're more familiar with and are cloud-based and easy to use and make sense for the way that they expect technology to function.
Yes, you want mobile access. You want to be able to occasionally maybe work from home, the odd afternoon, whatever it is. You want remote access on your laptop. You want ease of use, a clean user interface. And a lot of the systems in construction that have been around a while have accumulated so much functionality and so many edge cases and nuances specific to construction that it's hard to port those over and go rebuild a system that took 30 years to build from day one, right? So I think we'll see that over time. But to your point, there is a good reason there's still older software that is widely used and even being newly adopted in construction. Construction is complex. They have complex workflows. We like to say they have complex data models, right? Like the concept of a change order or subcontract doesn't exist really outside of construction, and certainly not in generic software that's not built specific for construction. And I think there's been a lot of interest and investment, and with the rise of some major software companies like Autodesk building for the industry, it's attracted a lot of capital, entrepreneurs, investors, and I think we'll see the adoption and deployment, but also building of new software accelerate. And that's really just been over the past 15 years.
Yeah, it's a new rocket ship. It's an exciting one, but I think it's also an overwhelming one for a lot of companies, because even if you didn't have tools that necessarily fit the needs that you were expecting to support, it's easier to choose from 5 tools versus 250. And
Yes.
I think folks can get caught in a bit of decision paralysis, and very justifiably so, because you really have to pick the right tools for your workflows and not be out chasing tools just because it sounds neat or the buzz is tied to AI or whatever it might be. And so there has to be a lot of intent, especially because of the amount of things happening all at the same time.
And if you don't, to bring it back to integrations, if your core systems, your accounting system, your ERP, your HR system, don't have a means to integrate with this growing ecosystem of cloud applications, that's going to hinder your business.
Yeah.
It's going to lead to it being difficult to recruit newer talent, younger talent who's used to, having ChatGPT on their iPhone, right? It's going to be harder to make quick decisions because data is going to be outdated. You're going to be waiting for, Jim or Sally from accounting to produce the job cost report at the end of the month, when really you should have that in your hands right now, right? Having core systems to go back to, hey, I want to modernize my tech stack. Where do I focus? Ensuring your core systems that house most of your data, especially historically, that these newer cloud systems are going to need to access, ensuring those are connected is, if they're not already, should be a top priority.
And I love your point about timeliness of data as well, because when these older tools are slow to produce, or it's complex to create a report that you might need, or dashboarding isn't even something that's on the table as far as having visual access to the information, getting the report 2 weeks late might be the end of your company, depending on the severity of a problem that had arisen, but you just didn't have visibility on because you didn't have the right information at the right moment. And so I think this really does come back to the importance and value of integrations and being able to create dashboarding and having access to all of that rich data that you're capturing all day, every day in a way that your project team trusts also, but also has and trusts and has the right point in time, because nobody cares about that report. If it's 2 weeks late, we've already moved on to something else, or we're already behind schedule and now we're worried about something else, or God forbid, it's time for liquidated damages because you're multiple days behind schedule now. Like, that's not a good moment.
No. Or if you get audited or something, if your data is not timely, you're going to spend a ton of time combing through that backlog of all your transactions, your invoices, your line items, and preparing for that. So you can save a lot of time.
Yeah. Let's dig in a little bit more about data here. And I think concepts of like clean and accurate data come up fairly often when talking about integrations and just data in general. Can you talk to me a little bit about what is clean data? Why does it matter if it's accurate? Like, obviously, when you start moving it from system to system, I think this becomes even more important, but unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah, clean data means it's well formatted, it's free of mistakes, and you can essentially process it without hitting validation errors across systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you combine that with accuracy, so you might have clean data, but it might be inaccurate, right? But you could have accurate data, but it's quote, dirty data or unclean. What does accurate data mean? Accurate, in my mind, is something happened in the world. An event happened on the job site and you need to create a change order. You do that. How quickly is that real world event reflected in your data?
Mm-hmm.
That to me is accuracy. And there's a component of timeliness there, right? Which we can get into. But clean data, having accurate data, meaning, does it represent what's actually the true state of your job site, your team, your certifications, your payroll, whatever it is? Those are, top priority. And then you wrap in timeliness, which is when that event happens, what's the lag between that event happening and you and your teams representing that in their systems and then knowing about it,
mm-hmm.
right? So there's one component of all three of these within a system, your project management system, your accounting system. But then you introduce the dimension of, well, we're going to make this data, whether it's a record for a vendor or record for an employee, available across multiple systems. Then timeliness has another dimension, which is, well, if it's clean, timely, accurate in system A, is it also in system B? And that is a much different problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more the integration problem. So if you're talking one system, clean, accurate, timely, a lot of that's just data input, data capture. And a good heuristic to use there is, and maybe rule to get to that clean, accurate, timely data is put guardrails in your systems, right? So don't allow people to fat finger something, have hard validation rules. So you can at least capture data when it happens fairly quickly, but also accurately,
mm-hmm.
right? So you're going to like standardize and format the data there. Where we come in and where we focus is once that data is captured, it's in a system and you want to replicate or share that or sync it across multiple systems. How do you do that, right? And there you're talking multiple systems. So they might have different rules. And I like to think of this as like a shipping route where you're sending a package from a port, you're pushing it to another port. You got to have the right permits. The ports are going to have different rules and regulations. You might not even know those up front. The data or package might change halfway through and get repackaged with others. So it's much harder, and happy to go into detail about how we do that. But when you're taking data, putting it across systems, I think the challenge gets much harder.
I'd actually like to hear more about that. And alongside just some thoughts on like, how does data get corrupted? How does it not end up being reflected accurately in system B when it moves over? Like, I think it would be useful for folks to understand a bit more about what goes wrong when, okay, we thought everything was okay in system A, but in system B, it's not okay anymore. And we have no idea why. Like,
Right.
Mash all those together. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So one could be you have bad translation rules in between, right? And that's where the integration comes in. You want something that very clearly explains and that you can understand as the operator of the system and certainly as the integration provider. If anything goes wrong, you can debug it, but something that's clearly documented. So you're going to have, let's just keep vendor as the example, in one system and a vendor in the other. Which fields map, right? Am I mapping the name to the name or am I mapping the name to the description in the other system? So having some sort of very clear set of field mappings and documentation that you can put in front of your team and everyone can agree on and remains consistent over time. So if a field's pointing to a wrong field, of course, that's going to screw up your data when it's in system B, right? Even if it looks good in system A. 2 is trying to avoid as much as possible manual input and processes, right? So a lot of teams transfer data via spreadsheets. That sounds as messy and error prone as it is, right? So if you're taking data, you're exporting it from system A, you're running some VLOOKUPs or macros or transformations. Even if that's semi-automated, you're still doing that manually in Excel. And if you're using different file versions or different years of the software, it's going to behave differently. So removing that manual component of even if it's data transfer that's semi-automated, getting that out of the way so you can run automated rules that are predictable. 3, ensuring that you've got an end-to-end control over how the systems talk to each other. And what I mean by that is you don't want a bunch of moving parts where you're handing off and playing a game of telephone from, well, we've got system A, we've got integration provider 1, integration provider 2, and then system B. You want one party managing that in-between kind of bridge, right? And why is that? They control exactly the end-to-end workflow. You don't want any other parts meddling in that transformation. Another is you want to avoid black boxes. And this is to wrap it into a timely topic. One of the challenges with AI is it's hard to audit, right? So if you've got, let's just run with ChatGPT, because I mentioned it earlier, if you got an open AI API call in the middle, guess what? That's a bit of a black box. It's hard to understand.
You don't know what's coming.
Hopefully it's great, but you can validate it, but it's hard to audit and to troubleshoot, right? So you want deterministic behavior is what we would call. So no black boxes. And then you want clear, I'll say, metrics and audits in between. If something does go wrong or happens unexpectedly, you can catch that immediately and avoid replicating that across other systems and relying on that inaccurate piece of data. So we, in our tools, have audit mechanisms, just like any good business does in their operating procedures. We'll audit to make sure when we perform this transformation, let's just say we agreed with the customer to aggregate line items into a top level roll-up number. Do the line items actually add up to that number, right? And oftentimes in rounding or in software, you use different field types, the numbers might be a penny off. And that penny, when aggregated, actually is meaningful to your tax reporting or audit history. So variety of things there and controls you can put in the mix to avoid the data corruption problem.
I think it really does come back to the intentionality we were talking about earlier. You really have to have a good sense of what you're trying to move from system to system, what you expect it to look like or do in that other system, and how it's captured. Just speaking from, a novice perspective, the number of fields that you're moving around at any given time, like, what is it? Thousands, tens of thousands, probably more than that. In some
we have
instances.
Customers syncing millions of records per day.
Yeah. You have to be on top of your stuff at the start of that journey to make sure that volume of data when moving around still makes sense at the end of what you're doing. And I think also that still comes back to trust, because when somebody does end up in their Power BI dashboard or whatever that tool is that you're looking at, and they make a choice and the data that they made that decision on was inaccurate, you don't get to make a second impression. That first impression is going to last a long time. And your project manager, especially if they're more of an old school project manager, is going to go, okay, yeah, I knew that data was all BS. I'm going to go back to making gut feel decisions, which work often. They have a ton of experience and perspective and knowledge. But I think being able to be confident in that moment just makes that certainty of decision-making and speed of decision-making all that much faster, and really makes a big impact on the business, especially at scale when you're working at a monstrous general contractor that could be doing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars worth of construction every year. Like, this matters, and it matters more the bigger the scale that the narrative ends up being.
Absolutely. And for a lot of businesses, margins are tight, right? So if you slip up on one data point or you miss a budget overrun by 2 weeks, you could have caught that, a week and a half prior. That's meaningful. You might lose money on that project instead of making 5%. That can swing, make or break a project. So wrapping back to what we were discussing earlier, ensure that you're allocating the right time and resources to make an integration happen, because you could argue it's better to not have an integration than to have a bad one, because that's going to lead to inaccurate data and, to your point, losing trust among your stakeholders that make the eventual implementation of a better integration, a vendor switch, a new piece of software, that much harder.
Yeah, it's nuanced and very relationships driven. And I think just being very thoughtful at the start of these conversations has an incredible ROI when you're actually leveraging and using the tools and tech. And I know this isn't easy by any means. It's very easy for us to sit here and talk about it at a high level of just kind of unpacking what's happening. With that in mind, what questions do you wish contractors would ask you more often, or what questions should they be asking their technology providers that they're evaluating and working with? Like, where should they start, especially if they're feeling overwhelmed or feeling behind from their peers?
I would say one that I always like customers asking is, here's what we want to do roughly. Does this make sense? Can you try to poke holes in this? And just having that intentionality, even just a vague sense of, here's what we're trying to get out of it. Does your tool do this? If not, can you point us in the right direction? So some sense of what are you looking to accomplish and sense checking that with the vendor. And why do that? One, it forces you to kind of prioritize up front. What do we want to get out of this? Two, it helps you evaluate the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
If the vendor just sells you, regardless of what you say, probably not a good partner to have, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're a great fit, whether you want to do A, B, or C, but wait, those are contradictory. Doesn't matter. Buy our software. Probably not a great fit. Two, understanding implementation, right? So a lot of software vendors have really good sales pitches, maybe even great products, but the implementation is where the rubber meets the road. And if you have a great piece of software, but it's misimplemented, it's not going to work well for your team. Everyone's going to get frustrated.
Yeah.
You're probably at that point locked into a 1 or 2 or 3 year contract, and you're going to feel burned, right? And that'll go back to the problems we discussed before of maybe you're more gun shy and you've got some scar tissue adopting more software and your company suffers as a result. So when you talk to a vendor, understand who does the implementation, how long does that take? Drill down. A customer like me, I'm a specialty, whatever, electrical contractor in the Bay Area. Can I talk to customers who have gone through implementation? Who did they work with? How long did it take? Where are the common mistakes? On a related point, understanding when customers don't renew their contract with you, vendor, why?
Yeah.
What are the most common reasons? Is it a price hike? Is it the implementation was botched? Is it something totally different? And an honest vendor will tell you that. And they'll have data to back it up, and it'll stoke a great conversation around, renewals and, where the friction is and how to mitigate that up front. Those are some of the questions that a good vendor will like those questions because it allows them to highlight, hopefully, what are selling points of their product, right?
Yeah. And I think you get to the core of some of this is there's a relationship that exists with a good vendor or a good software provider. And it's not just a transactional, okay, you've bought this now, here you go. Right. There's a deep relationship that needs to happen for the implementation, especially if it's complex, but also with regards to training and support and making sure that they feel like you're there to help make sure everything is good to go. And when it's not, feel comfortable coming to you and saying, this isn't going well, help us figure out why so we can fix it. And if the provider isn't available and providing that level of support, it's worth having some big questions in the back of your head as far as, okay, is this going to work long term? And I think the companies that do really truly value that relationship, and it's a two-way relationship of feedback, and this might even iterate into the vendor's product development where they go, okay, we're learning from this unexpected challenge. How do we mitigate this in the future? Because even though construction companies have differing processes to some degree, they're still all very similar. And so if a problem comes up once, it's probably going to come up again. And being able to react and respond to that, I think, is a testament to the software vendor who's providing you technology in the first place.
Yes. And a lot of vendors, or I won't speak on behalf of other vendors out there, but one thing to watch out for is people who might have good answers to those questions, but come contract, sign on the dotted line, there aren't SLAs or details around, hey, what does support actually look like in that contract? So that's another thing to be aware of or ensure, your vendor is representing is not only we say the right things, we actually back it up in our contract. We have SLAs of different tiers and structures, and those are reasonable and work for your company. Support hours, response times to different issues. If something's impacting your payroll, well, that should have a pretty urgent response versus, something that's impacting a vendor description, which if you never correct it, maybe no one is really impacted. So I think having a clear schedule, which shows the company has thought about, hey, here's how we treat our customers and here's what works well, and ensuring that aligns with your company's expectations is another thing to look out for.
I love that. And it's just, again, it just comes back to being very intentional as you navigate whatever choices you're making with the technology that you purchase and how you deploy it and what your expectations are for what you're going to get from those tools as well. So I love this, but I want to pivot into a little bit of tech nerd conversation now
Let's do
because
it.
we're on Digital Builder. I'm a big nerd. I can't help it. And I wanted to come back to AI and get your thoughts on how AI is impacting the industry from your perspective right now. And also what feels real and really meaningful. And where do you think we're still in hype land as far as AI, specifically with regards to the AEC space?
Where I see signals of hype is any company that struggles to explain their product without using the term AI or ML, right? So if you're injecting AI into a process, let's say off the top of my head, material procurement, great. I can describe that problem without using a buzzword. However, if I struggle to describe my product to you and I'm really anchoring into the AI angle, yeah, maybe the ROI isn't proven out yet. Maybe it's a little newer and early stage and more in the hype cycle side of things. I think in construction, there's so much opportunity to take software that has existed for decades and to modernize that. And a lot of that does not require, you could argue most doesn't require AI or ML. It's building a better mousetrap that has the conveniences of what we've been discussing. APIs, mobile access, cloud-based software. There's so much opportunity there that where you can always layer in AI and ML in clever ways, but you don't need to lead with the sales kind of jargon to pitch the product. And I think uniquely in construction, maybe other kind of under-digitized, you could argue, industries, there's so much opportunity there where, to me, the value and what's most exciting are the companies doing the unsexy plumbing and infrastructure work to modernize construction without the buzzwords.
Yeah.
That to me is super exciting. There's a ton of companies out there doing it. A lot of them are our customers. And I think most construction companies need that. They don't need necessarily, maybe some of the bigger companies do, an AI tool. They need a cloud-based HR tool, a cloud-based scheduling tool that connects with their systems. It seems basic, but there's so much opportunity out there because this hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, I think folks really need to be intentional and thoughtful about what AI tools they adopt as well. And I had a recent conversation with May Winfield. It was recent, like a year ago or so. Go back and take a peek at that episode because we talked at length about the risks of using AI in construction, both in the legal sense and just with regards to your proprietary data. And I try to say this at any opportunity I can. Anything you put into ChatGPT, if you don't have your own company instance that is walled off and isolated for your own company, anything you put into ChatGPT is in ChatGPT and could be regurgitated to anybody else in the world who puts in the right prompting and keystrings because it's learning and absorbing. And so I think folks need to be deliberate about how they leverage and implement tools and also be thoughtful about, okay, if you're chasing AI, make sure it's a tool that is meant for construction because these broad technologies might not fit in an applicable way as far as what you're expecting to get out of it. And so I think there's so much opportunity and potential for augmentation and reducing errors and speeding things up. But let's be real, some of these big models are still hallucinating and still making stuff up. And so there's opportunity, but at the same time, risk. And I think folks need to be intentional about it. And I love when we're talking about this too. I know some organizations will have like a AI steward organization within their company to really think this out and figure out what do people expect to use these tools for and what do they expect to get out of them? Because that's going to make a big difference in what tools you choose to adopt, but also it's going to make a big difference in identifying where are the gaps in your team's understanding of these tools based on what they're saying they would do with them today or want them to get from that tool as well. And so I think especially with something like this, the black box point you made earlier, there's a lot of unknown. And so being very thoughtful upfront in going down this journey is, I think, even more important than the due diligence you should do when evaluating a scheduling tool or something else that's more traditional for the construction industry. Yeah, I love it. Like I use AI at work very regularly, but it's in very focused ways and it's within
What do you use AI for?
Yeah, I use it to do a lot of call summaries. So I do a lot of kickoff calls, obviously. So I'll go through and just help bring through, okay, what were some of the main points that we talked about? I think I told you this during our kickoff call, but I have ADHD and it's hard for me to take notes effectively and also be super engaged in the conversation. And so I love being able to transcribe the episode that we've done, plug it into our own walled off version of ChatGPT, and give myself a starting point to go through, especially if I've done 5 or 6 or 8 kickoff calls over the course of a week and a half. It really helps me have a starting point, and it gets me from I've talked to a really smart, cool person about stuff that I'm excited about to, okay, let me focus and figure out what I'm going to talk about during that conversation. I'll be honest, not everything that comes out of it I even use or even consider, but it gives me a really great framework to begin, and it brings my from kickoff to I'm ready for the conversation we're having right now, shortens that time frame considerably.
Totally. And I think that highlights an interesting point, which is my use cases overlap with yours, my personal use of AI, and it's typically areas where precision isn't the highest priority.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe speed or text generation or image generation, just getting content out there. And if it's 95% correct, that's good enough, right? If your call summary is even 90% correct, that's probably fine. In a lot of construction, precision really, really matters. Scheduling dates, change order numbers, specific dollar amounts in a purchase order, per diems on someone's payroll. Like these are critically important areas where precision is maybe the top priority, maybe even more important than timeliness, right? You don't want to get it wrong. You're maybe more okay going slower to get it right. And I think that's where you got to be really careful injecting AI. So if it's in construction, maybe you've got people trying to do information retrieval a little bit faster. Maybe that's a great use case because precision, it can present you with a bunch of options and it's more on the human operator to understand which of those options is correct. Great. I think that makes sense. But if I were a construction, contractor, I'd be very wary of deploying AI in any high precision outcome, could hinge on a few decimal points scenarios.
Yeah, I don't know if your AI for payroll is, is the starting point.
And I don't know if you know a company, Rippling, their CEO, he was on a podcast. He's got a great line. He's like, they're a HR provider here in San Francisco. They say, or he says, I don't want my payroll system to talk to me. I don't want to chat with it. I just want it to sit in the background, work quietly, and execute, on time and appropriately. So I think that summarizes nicely if we're to deploy AI, maybe we're not to.
I like that. Yeah, not everything is a chat agent or something that's going to pretend like it's a person when you're interacting with it. That's funny, but it's very astute at the same time. And it's interesting hearing somebody from that perspective saying it so openly too, because I don't think everybody is quite as forthcoming about that vibe.
Especially here in San Francisco. I mean, you drive around, all the billboards are AI and ML and what have you. And again, there is clear value there. I just think you have to be very specific about where you deploy that, what you expect out of it.
Yeah, I think that makes a bunch of sense. Well, I've got one final question for you today, and it's one of my favorites because I get to ask everybody, what is one tool that you use on every project, no matter what project you're working on?
I'm going to relate it to something you said earlier. On every single call, whether it's an interview, whether I'm not using it now, it's a sales call, whether it's a vendor call, we use a recording tool that it's called Fathom. There's a bunch of them out there. Zoom does recording as well. And what we do is we transcribe and then we take all those notes, we put it in our system of record, which is then integrated with a bunch of other systems in our company. We eat our own dog food, I guess. And we make that available to everyone in the company. So we transcribe, we capture what was discussed, key points, takeaways, action items, and we share that across the company for transparency, so everyone can understand what happened in that conversation. But also, I don't have a great memory, so it's a bit of a crutch, right?
Yep. No, I lean on it very heavily and very candidly. So, and it helps. I'm very grateful for technology like that. So I like that one. It's something that I lean on very regularly in my own work. I use a different variation of it, but either way, the intention and outcome is largely very similar. So yes. I appreciate that a whole bunch. Well, everybody out there listening, of course, you've probably figured out by now, you are listening to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. If you have any questions for me, you want to reach out, you can always find me on LinkedIn. Also, if you could do me a huge favor, word of mouth makes a big difference for sharing and spreading the word. So if you love this episode or just love Digital Builder, I'd be very grateful if you could go out and tell your friends and make sure the world knows all about what we're talking about here. And of course, we are on YouTube. If you're listening on the audio side, we are in a beautiful location here in San Francisco, so it's worth checking out. Of course, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and every other podcast player. But until the next time, Goodbye.